descended into madness, causing a regency to be formed. This started a major power struggle for control in the council between Charles's uncle and brother. After a failed assassination, both sides would appeal for England for help in the civil war between France and the Burgundians. Paris would fall to the Burgundians in 1480, but the army wasn't able to stop the massacre of the Count of Armagnac and his followers, with a total death toll between 1 and 5,000. In August 1415, Henry V led a force of 10,500 men into France, laying siege to Harfleur. The siege would end in late September with English victory. Because of this unexpected delay, Paris would not be open for the taking. Instead, Henry would raid around English Calais. In a strange déjà vu, the English and the French would fight for who could outflank the other. This would culminate in the Battle of Agincourt, just north of the River Somme. Despite being outnumbered 5-1, Henry would take victory in the battle, with the death of many Armagnac leaders and 40% of French nobility. Henry was worried about the large number of French prisoners, deeming them a security risk, and ordered their deaths before the French reserves would flee the field. Henry would take much of Normandy, including Caen in 1417 and Rouen in 1419, marking Normandy English for the first time in 2 centuries. The English would make a formal alliance with the Burgundians after they took Paris in 1418, before the assassination of Duke John the Fearless in 1419. In 1420, Henry V met with Charles VI, signing the Treaty of Troyes, allowing Henry to finally marry Charles's daughter, Catherine of Valois. This also allowed Henry's children to inherit the throne of France. The Dauphin, Charles VII, was declared illegitimate, and Henry would enter Paris later that year, ratifying the agreement by the Estates General. Henry would suffer a setback in France as he left his presumptive heir, Thomas, Duke of Clarence, in charge while he returned to England. Thomas engaged a Franco-Scottish force and would be slain by Alexander Buchanan. Thomas Montacute, 4th Earl of Salisbury, would take the Duke of Clarence's body as he organised the retreat. Henry V would return to France and made for Paris. It would be from here that he launched an attack towards the town of Meaux, held by the Dauphin. After a 7-month siege, the town fell in May 1422. A few weeks later, Henry was joined by his queen and French court, and they went to rest at Senlis. While resting, Henry V was discovered to be ill, most likely dysentery. When they marched out of the Upper Loire, he would divert to the royal castle at Vincennes, where he would die at the end of August. The elderly and insane King of Glass, Charles VI, would die 2 months later. Henry left his only son, his 9-month-old, later to be Henry VI. Before his death, Henry gave command of English forces to the Duke of Bedford, and under his command, more key battles would be won. In 1428, England would lay siege to Orleans, and thus starting a months-long stalemate. With food in short supply, it was looking more and more likely that the city would fall. That would be, if not for one woman in shining armour. Joan of Arc persuaded the Dauphin to send her to Orleans, after she had received visions from God to drive out the English. She would arrive on April 29th, and with her arrival, the tide would turn against the English. Single-handedly, she would raise the troops' morale and launch attacks on English redoubts, forcing the siege to be lifted. With this victory, the French would go on to take many English strongholds along the Loire River. These victories opened the way for the Dauphin to become Charles VII in July 1429. But after, the French failed to siege down Paris and had to escape to the Loire Valley. Later that year, Henry VI was coronated at Westminster Abbey, and then subsequently coronated King of France at Notre Dame de Paris. The following year, at the Siege of Compiègne, Joan of Arc was captured by the Burgundians, who would transfer her to English capture. Pierre Couchot would head the trial, and she was convicted of witchcraft and burned on May 30th, 1431. Spiritual or not, with Joan's execution, England started to be on the back foot heavily. Many of Henry's council favoured keeping the war going, and the Duke of Bedford wished to defend Normandy, as much as the Duke of Gloucester wished to defend Calais. In 1435, negotiations at the Congress of Arras came to a halt, as the English demands were simply preposterous. But as the Congress ended in September, Philip the Good, Duke of Burgundy, deserted to Charles VII and signed a treaty at Arras, returning Paris to French hands. If the loss of Paris wasn't enough, England's alliance with Burgundy was stretched thin. The long truces would prove helpful for the French and gave Charles VII time to centralise the French state and reorganise before continuing the fight. By 1449, Rouen was back in French hands, and in 1450, an English army was caught trying to relieve Caen and defeated. Once Normandy was back in French control, Charles moved his eyes down to Gascony, the last English possession on French soil, excluding Calais. On June 30th, 1451, the French won the siege and took Bordeaux. England would retake it the following year in October, but were then defeated at the Battle of Castillon in July 1453. This would mark the end of the physical war, as both England and France remained at war for another 20 years. But with unrest on the island, England had to sue for peace. English landowners would be up in arms about the financial losses because of the war, being a large cause of the War of the Roses, which would kick off 2 years later. In 1474, the 100 Years' War nearly restarted when Charles of Burgundy relied on English support and took up arms against Louis XI. The French would isolate the Burgundians by paying Edward IV off with a large sum of cash and an annual pension. It wouldn't be until the Treaty of Picquigny in 1475 that formally ended the 100 Years' War, with Edward rescinding his claim to the throne of France. But kings of England and later Great Britain would continue to claim the title until 1803. The French victory in the 100 Years' War ended a long period of instability that rooted itself back in 1066 when William the Conqueror took the title King of England, along with being a vassal of France. England would only be left with the port of Calais until 1558, and it would destroy the dream that England held of a joint monarchy, also leading to a phase of disdain for anything French. Most notably, while French had been used for the English noble and upper classes, that was now changed to English. However, both England and France would come out more unified after the war than they were before. In France, despite the destruction, it would help move itself away from a feudal state to a centralised body. For England, though, many more troubles would follow, as it would descend into a period of civil war between the House of Lancaster and York.